So I was originally going to do an analysis on the influence The Clash had on Green Day in a small series on influences, but during my research for it, I found an absolutely overwhelming wall of negativity from critics, forums, and so forth. So much in fact that I decided to scrap what I was doing and investigate this for myself. And what I ended up finding was that an issue that I think plagues music fame and how they intersect. Quick warning that I will be discussing this as if you have a fundamental understanding of Green Day's discography, but you won't need much more beyond that. I could have gone with many albums that highlight a massive change in the mainstream for a band. Metallica's Black Album, Linkin Park's Minutes to Midnights, bands like Coldplay, Maroon 5, but Green Day has two big sellout albums spanning a very long and successful career. Furthermore, they have sold out in two different ways by two different definitions. Before the turn of the century, selling out was a phrase that was used quite a lot and basically referred to an act signing to a label, wherein they make much more money and oftentimes make it big as well. As a longtime fan of music, I definitely connect with this. Seeing a band in a small club playing a very specific genre, then expand, hit the radio, and having their shows locked behind huge crowds and soaring prices makes you feel a bit less connected to the band. They feel less like your band, even though you liked them before they got hot. Dookie is Green Day's example of this. Hugely successful, influential, and a pretty hard turn from what Green Day did before. Gave people the impression that they were now just in it for the money. The definition has changed a bit since then, as signing to a label is no longer such a sin in the music world. It's weird that it was in the first place, and now it applies much more directly to the popularity and a band's attempts at making music appeal to more people. This in the past few decades refers heavily to radio play. Radio, for all the vast types of stations, has pretty set limits in what it likes. Songs that are 3 to 4 minutes, mixed in a clean, bright style, unmuddied topics, little use of bad words, and roughly within the style that is current to the music world. This is stifling for many bands, and oftentimes a very creative band will flat out fail when trying to meet the demands of radio play, which immensely boosts record sales, show turnouts, etc. It doesn't feel genuine, almost like watching a rock band play at a church. American Idiot falls under this type of selling out, very obviously so, almost purposefully. There's a very forced nature to American Idiot. Safe liberal lyrics trying to stick it to the man, but it also takes itself way seriously. There are many examples of this, but it's a pop-punk opera that literally hit Broadway. When looking at the band more than a decade later, it's easy to see the influence, but at the time it definitely felt try-hard. And it worked. The album was jam-packed with songs ready for the radio. American Idiot, Holiday, Broken Dreams, Novocaine, Wake Me Up. Nearly every song could be played on the radio aside from a few 9-minute medleys. Then they doubled down with another rock opera even more self-proclaiming, 3 albums of B-sides, and a return to form. Now that we are here about to go into the 20s, are they still a good band or did they sell out? Well, I think the answer is yes, they still are a good band. Pretty obviously, and I have a few points that I find to be unequivocally true to support this. The first is that fans suck, most of the time anyways, and not all of them. But there seems to be a point where a band gets too big and then fans start whining. This isn't always a bad thing, but if the fans had it their way, we'd end up with 5 Origins of Symmetries, 10 Blue albums, and in Green Day's case, a truckload of Dookies, which may sound great, but would be pretty shitty. What's worse is that when the bands consistently sound the same, fans also get mad. But bands expanding their sounds is what makes them exciting. It's how we end up with classics like Black Holes, Ratitude, and American Idiot, which may sound nothing like previous work by the artist. And yeah, one of these completely and utterly sucks, but the point is that bands trying new things is a net positive. And for anyone even moderately interested in music, this should be pretty obvious. But the term sellout plagues any Google search of a band making any sort of money, and nowhere does this label become more overused than in punk rock. I can't really go into why I think sellout is a lame, lazy term for people not happy that other people enjoyed a band's latest efforts, but I'll summarize it here, maybe even make a fuller video later. A band is considered to be selling out when it starts making music to appeal to everyone, as opposed to the people who already like them. You can't really even describe the term because it makes such little sense, or it doesn't seem all that bad. Making music that appeals to a wide audience in and of itself is a skill. Take Metallica for example. Enter Sandman is not my favorite song by them, but 30 years later still gets played on the radio, covered by all sorts of bands in a variety of genres, and blasted in every sports arena to date. If Kill 'Em All is Metallica showing off and expanding thrash metal, the Black Album is them showing they can write a song to get any crowd going. Both very impressive feats, but for different reasons. Punk music suffers from this twofold, because part of the appeal of punk is its realness. The fact that the band is making this music to show truth, but all of it is way more engineered than they let off. Sure, they probably feel all of what they are singing about, but using the phrase sellout is sort of assuming that the band is sitting in the studio, debating whether or not to include something because of how popular it would be. But music is much more involved than that. Some music just lends itself better to a more polished sound, and bands at some point just want to play something that may sound better to a wider audience. This concept is hard to put into words, but that's why I picked Green Day as my lead example of this. American Idiot is commonly cited as the album where they embrace their status as a hit and made as many songs as possible to be put on the radio. And they seemed to know that this onslaught of outrage was coming and embraced it. The album is an obvious attempt at branding. The title track pretty on the nose, the entire thing has been adapted into a play. Any one of these things could be considered a mortal sin for a punk band from which they could never regain their status again, but it worked probably better than even the band anticipated. The album has introduced an entire generation to the world of punk, even if you're only treated to a surface level take of the genre. Everyone had an opinion of the album, and those who loved it didn't really care what people yelling sellouts had to say. And this is where my real only point lands. Instead of seeing albums like this as a cash grab, flip the script. Bands often try to make music they like, and Green Day themselves had to have known that this new style was going to be perceived as selling out no matter what they did. People even considered Dookie as the album they sold out on, so with American Idiot they embraced it. The term sellout to me brings about an album being made simply for money, but there's actual heart here. People don't love the album because it can hit the radio with its songs, they love it because the songs actually have meat to them. The entire thing is a narrative and a flow that takes you from one bit to the next. It has a great blend of songs from 2-minute fast pop punk songs to 9-minute marathons with multiple rhythms, feels, and tones. This may have been a band that reached a large audience, but sellout is a lazy term for them, and undermines the skill it takes to make a song that so many people connect with. A guy that I met says it's his favorite album, and it's easy to brush him aside as saying that he doesn't really know music, but that's not what's going on here. It highlights how little thought critics put into their analysis of music at times. We can do a bit better than they don't sound like the last album. How lame is that? If you don't believe me, read a negative review of an album. When you strip away the fancy language and pretentious metaphors and whatnot, you are left with people just complaining that a band tried a style that they didn't like but lots of people did. You would think they'd just say meh, not for me, 2 out of 5 and move along, but instead they pretend to know the ins and outs of the creative process, the motives of the band, as if they were a member of the band that left once they started in a different direction. So what's the point of all this? Not to get rid of critique. Reviews on albums that are bad or not your style are necessary and valued. But to go after a band claiming to know their motives and to say the only reason a band made something is money is kind of lazy, especially when an album is objectively good. American Idiot existing is a net good for the music world, has inspired millions, introduced punk back into the world for many, and instead of plugging your ears and stomping your feet and screaming sellout, analyze. Look at the charts, look at the impact, appreciate the creativity, and understand that things not sounding the same is a far cry from throwing your principles away for a quick buck. Many bands will eventually lean towards a more pop, radio-friendly sound with one album eventually. Just accept it. Oftentimes it becomes one of the most important albums for the band, genre, and music in general.